All right, I know exactly what you're clicking on this video to hear me talk about, and if you want to hear me talk about more, click that subscribe button down below. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers. Now let's get into the daily news. Yes, the 1,000,000 to 1 chance happened. Conor Daly is going to start in the Daytona 500, and we're going to be talking about that as well as a few other things that are a little bit more, kind of broad stroke sort of things like format issues and certainly the debate about practice. I mean, I already kind of touched on it in a previous video, but it's pretty clear that it is a problem that the Daytona 500 does not have nearly enough practice, especially before the duels, before you even qualify for the race. You're not really giving guys a great shot. And just for posterity's sake, in case I don't mention it the rest of the video, Joey Logano won in Duel 1. The two drivers that qualified in the open cars from Duel 1 were Jimmy Johnson. Of course, we knew he was going to be on speed anyway, and Zane Smith for front row. Eric Almirola won Duel number 2 for Stewart Haas Racing. Travis Pastrana in on speed. Conor Daly in by racing his way in, though I think he would even be the first to admit that there wasn't much racing that Conor Daly had to do, and even admitted that on Fox. I mean, it was a luck thing. There's no doubt about it. But easily the biggest story to me, this whole Daytona 500 speed days. What was it the GP Labs put up? Speed couple of nights or whatever. I guess that's what we're calling it now. But yeah, I mean, this is huge. I mean, this is what a great story this is. I've mentioned it quite a few times, but I think we want more of this crossover with different sports and different disciplines trying to get into the big races. I want to see the big names in all of the races. And I respect the hell out of Conor Daly for doing this, because this was nuts. And really, this should not have worked out. I want to give a quick shout out to Chad Smith over on Twitter. I'm going to put this tweet up on the screen because it gives a great stat. Conor Daly becomes the 62nd driver to compete in both the Indianapolis 500 and the Daytona 500. And if he qualifies in Indy this year, we're expecting there to be only 33 cars. So as long as he makes a qualifying attempt, he will qualify. He'll be the 29th different driver to compete in both races in the same year. Yeah, awesome story. I mean, we talked a lot about this on our Daytona 500 preview episode of the David Land podcast. And I said at the time, that the only chance Conor Daly had was that the other open cars crashed. And I'll be darned, they actually did. I mean, the strategy of ride around in the back and just wait, it worked. I mean, I don't think that's what Conor wanted to do. I think he wanted to race. But, I mean, it was crazy, the fact that the car was bound. I mean, literally, the footage was unbelievable of the car coming out of the pits, something clearly wrong in the rear end. I don't know what the heck happened with the money team, but that thing was bouncing like a monster truck coming onto the racetrack. Conor's got bigger cojones than I have, because I would have just pulled that thing in and not run it at all. He started the race, ran it all day. Tony Eury Jr., who was on the pit box, worked on that car. Every pit stop they got, they were lucky, I think, that there were as many caution flags in this race as there were, because if Conor had been running the car that he was running at the beginning, the first stint of the race, he would have been multiple laps down, and maybe Austin Hill would have tried to stay out on the racetrack and try to chase down Conor Daly, or even just be enough laps ahead that it wouldn't have mattered. But that was this is one of the great stories, man. This is something that you don't really expect, but at the same time, that was the big debate with the money team, I think. I mean, they made it last year with Kaz Grala, so I think some of the expectations, or some of the people we're kind of counting out this team, that I don't think it was really fair to do. I mean, clearly, for whatever reason, they were not prepared for this race, because, I mean, he didn't even get to qualify yesterday. There was an electrical fire in his car, burned a hole, I believe, in the electrical box, and they weren't able to actually take their spot in single car qualifying. So, there's no chance of getting in on speed. I don't think that car necessarily would have made it. I mean, the other thing, too, is that the open cars are so strong this year. Jimmy Johnson, you had a front row car in there. You had a 2311 car in there. You had a Colleague Racing car that missed the show. Beard Oil always makes the Daytona 500, it seems like. The only time they don't is when they get wrecked, and that's kind of what I looked at with Austin Hill is like, I kind of looked at a couple of years ago when Noah Gragson got taken out when he was in position to qualify for the Daytona 500. I kind of felt like Austin Hill was going to have something very similar like that happen to him, and it ended up happening. And what's crazy about that one is, it was almost like an ARCA crash. It really was. And I mean, in some ways, Travis Pastrana did kind of play the role of ARCA brakes. But I mean, Daniel Suarez, what the heck was he doing? Just completely turned Kyle Busch right in the middle of the back straightaway while Kyle Busch was leading. I don't see the point why that happened. They're running in a straight line. I mean, it wasn't even that close to the end of the race, but Kyle Busch gets turned and Austin Hill gets piled up with Travis Pastrana. Both cars got involved. And what's funny is, I was like going, whoa, when I'm watching it. And it didn't even register to me right away that both of the open cars had been involved in that crash. I mean, I saw Austin Hill was in it and I went, well, okay, that's something. But if Travis Pastrana still wins, quote unquote, the duel out of the open cars, it didn't matter. Conor had to be the first open car across the line based on the current rules that they have for Daytona Duels. But when I kind of looked closer and I saw the 67 car was spinning too. And then I thought back to these next-gen cars are extremely fragile. We've seen the minute that they get any kind of suspension damage, they're done. And as it turned out, both the 67 car and the 62 both had suspension damage. Both went behind the wall, and Conor Daly qualified for the Daytona 500 in one of the most unlikely scenarios that I think we could have possibly imagined. But I think that's something that I really think that they need to fix for next year. And it shocks me because they did, if I remember correctly, they had a practice session before qualifying and before the duels last year. Why they changed that, I have no idea. But what a terrible decision for NASCAR. I mean, I already talked about from the perspective of just like the fanfare and excitement and hype of the Daytona 500, not having practice before qualifying is just an unfathomably silly move, in my opinion. But I think it really hurts teams like the money team who are willing to bring in a driver from outside of NASCAR, a driver who brings a fan base who would be interested in watching the race, and a great storyline. I mean, this is a great storyline, but it was 1,000,001 chance of this happening. I think you want, when a star comes in from another series, that they have a fair and equal chance to get their car prepared and actually be able to have a legitimate racing shot of making it. I mean, Conor Daly even told MRN that he already booked a ticket to LA, a plane ticket to LA, because he wasn't expecting to make the show. The lack of practice is just ridiculous. And I understand, some people are going to say that, well, you should be prepared if you're going to run the Daytona 500, but no other race in the world, no other big race, major race in the world has zero practice before you're supposed to qualify for it. I mean, it's Bush League is what it is, frankly. And teams, and I think it would make the duels better too, because I think the duels right now are looked at as a practice session. Oh, wow, we actually got to work on the setup of our cars because they're not allowed to, because it's an impound rule after qualifying. So literally you go qualify, car's impounded, you can't work on it, you get into the duel, and you see with Alex Bowman, he didn't even attempt to race because he knew he had a car that was set up totally for qualifying. So that would be the first thing I would change with the duels, is that you should be able to adjust the cars between qualifying and the race. I mean, that's just silly that they're not allowed to do that. Not the least of which they don't have practice in the first place to work on their cars. The second thing would be, with the manufacturer racing the way it is, in the races, in the duels that it goes green and you only have one pit stop, the manufacturer stuff really ruins the show, in my opinion. More so even than the fact that a lot of teams are running qualifying setups and they have to make adjustments during the pit stops. When you got one pit stop, I would make it so that the race is only one. You can go it in one fuel tank, because otherwise, I think it's silly to just see all the Fords come in together and then the Toyotas kind of hang on with them and then all the Chevys come in. I would rather just see everybody race. Obviously, we saw it in the second duel, but that was just because of the fact that the yellows fell right, that the pitting happened under caution. If the yellows hadn't fallen right, then we wouldn't have gotten nearly as interesting of a duel as we would have gotten. And the final thing is, I think the rules to actually get in the field are outdated and ridiculous. And we know this from Ty Dillon a couple of years ago. The fact that the cars that have already essentially qualified for the race on speed, why they are involved at all in determining what happens with the other two cars in the other two duels, I think is just asinine. I mean, the fact that Austin Hill could have crashed, and just as long as Travis Pastrana, who has already qualified for the race, even if Conor Daly would have finished ahead of Austin Hill on track, would not have qualified for the race, I think is silly. I understand there's a bit of consideration for having the quote-unquote fastest cars in the field, but if you're not going to give them practice, really what you're doing is the duel becomes a practice session / a qualifying race. So I don't know, man. I think the way it is now, you don't have 60 cars there anymore. You don't have to protect the cars that were actually legitimately fast in qualifying, and you only have 4 spots because of the stupid charters anyway. I don't like it. The final thing I want to say is looking ahead to the Daytona 500, at least as things stand right now, it looks like the Fords are extremely fast. Obviously, Team Penske always very good. Front Row Motorsports is looking once again like a Daytona 500 winning potential team. Todd Gilliland, I think, could win this race. It's not just because he had an amazing Kyle Busch-style save, but the way he ran up front, the way he drafted with other cars, I think people are going to actually want to work with him, and that, I think, is going to be a key coming to the end of the race. I mean, it always is at Daytona. Will the veterans want to work with you? Will an Austin Cindric or a Ryan Blaney or a Joey Logano be willing to push you to the finish? And boy, oh boy, is Michael McDowell willing to push. So if, let's say, Todd Gilliland's ahead of Michael McDowell, I bet you those two guys are going to push until they either hit a wall or hit the finish line. So that's my thoughts on the duel. Congratulations, Conor Daly. You know, hats off to you. Looking forward to seeing him in the Daytona 500 and the other 39 guys too. Yeah, man. And as you know, this is going to be the place to listen to commentary that perhaps you won't hear anywhere else. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.